Hello, in this video lecture, we're going to be talking about TRICARE. And chapter 16 covers TRICARE. What TRICARE is a healthcare program for uniformed service members and their families. So people in the Army, Navy, National Guard, reserves, everybody and their family are eligible. In addition, it covers former spouses and survivors, widows, widowers, what have you. TRICARE was created to expand healthcare access and ensure the quality of healthcare for uniformed service members. Originally, TRICARE was known as CHAMPUS, a Civilian Health Medical Programs Uniformed Services. And it basically was designed to provide medical care for the families of active duty members. It was managed by the Defense Health Agency and had all the military treatment facilities and TRICARE. TRICARE is split up into 3 regions in the United States and 1 overseas region. So in other words, the Ramstein Medical Air Base in Germany is part of the overseas region. The beneficiaries are the uniformed service members and their families and dependents. This covers personnel who are on active duty, deceased, retired, and members of the National Guard or reserves. All TRICARE members have a common access card, which we'll see on the next page. And here's an example of one. Again, as mentioned, TRICARE is administered by the Defense Health Agency under the direction of the Department of Defense, under the Assistant Secretary of Defense Health Affairs. They're accountable for the quality of healthcare provided to all beneficiaries, and they serve as an arbiter for any consideration for claims that are denied. Some of you who have served in the military may be familiar with some of the facilities that are on our military bases around the country and the world, such as Ramstein, Tripler in Hawaii, and others. And these are hospitals and clinics that provide inpatient and ambulatory and emergency department care to all TRICARE beneficiaries. They also have financial counselors who answer any questions about eligibility, additional benefits, coordination of care, and other services. Finally, as we've seen throughout this course with all insurance, we have utilization management. In other words, we want to manage the patient at the most appropriate level of care. And this is done through TRICARE's utilization management program. This coordinates and monitors the beneficiaries' services and what options they have available. And this promotes quality, cost-effective care. One of the things that you hear not only with TRICARE, but with other insurance is critical pathways. In other words, these are basically flow charts that are initiated when somebody presents with certain signs and symptoms. We also have clinical practice guidelines, and these are decision-making tools, again, usually in the form of a flow chart that are used by providers to determine appropriate healthcare. So somebody comes into an emergency room with abdominal pain, they'll go through the clinical pathway to work them up and care for them appropriately. If a patient is admitted, we don't just discharge them out. We want to continue the utilization management to ensure they don't come right back. So this requires discharge planning. In other words, where are we going to send the patient home to? Are we going to discharge them with follow-ups by home health or other services to ensure that they have a favorable outcome and don't come right back to the hospital? And this may also involve nurses, nurse case managers, social workers, and others to help the patient and their families. That's all I have for you. We'll see you online. Bye now.